Run your hand along the leading edge of this wing, and you'll feel something the photographs never quite tell you. It's thin, shockingly thin. It curves away from your fingers in a shape you don't get from a ruler, a long, clean ellipse that tapers to almost nothing at the tip, like the wing of a bird that was built to hunt. And under the skin, where you'd expect ribs and struts and rivets doing the heavy lifting, there's mostly just that skin, a smooth aluminum alloy shell that is itself holding the whole thing together. It is, and I don't say this lightly about a lump of metal beautiful. People fall in love with this aeroplane before they know a single fact about it. And that's the problem I want to talk to you about today. Because almost everything you think you know about this famous machine, who built it, what it did, why it mattered, is either half true or belongs to somebody else entirely. The most famous fighter of the war didn't win the battle it's famous for. Not on its own. Not even close. So let's get the story straight. Let's talk about the Spitfire and about the plane that actually did the work. My name's Reg, and I should tell you up front where I'm coming from, because it colors everything I'm about to say. I spent the best part of 40 years with my head inside engine bays. Cars first, then trucks then. When I finally had a shed big enough and a wife patient enough, old military machines. Tanks mostly. Wrecks that other people had given up on. I'd drag them home on a low loader, all seized and rusted and full of birds' nests, and I'd spend 2 years and a fortune bringing them back to life. And my mate Stan would stand there the whole time telling me I'd got the timing wrong. So I don't come at these machines like a historian, with dates and campaigns. I come at them the way I come at any engine on my bench. I want to know how it was made and by whom, and what it was like to keep running when it was cold and wet, and everything was trying to shake itself to pieces. And when it comes to the Spitfire, I've got a soft spot the size of a hangar, and I've also got a grudge. Because this old girl gets all the love, all the poems, all the flypasts, and the poor plane that did more of the actual fighting barely gets a mention. That's not right. So today I'm going to give you both. The legend, honestly told, and the workhorse it was standing in front of. Come and lean on the bench. First, let's kill the myth because you're carrying it whether you know it or not. The story, the one everyone knows, goes like this. Summer 1940. Britain stands alone. The sky fills with German bombers, and up to meet them go the Spitfires, this gorgeous, war-winning wonder plane, and they shoot the enemy out of the air and save the nation, and that's why we remember them. One plane, one summer, one miracle. It's a lovely story. Bits of it are even true, but as a description of what actually happened, it's about as accurate as saying a car is just an engine. The Spitfire was there, it fought hard, and it earned its reputation for real. But it did not win that battle alone. It was not even the aeroplane that shot down the most enemy aircraft. And here's the one that surprises people most. The man who designed it never lived to see any of it. He was dead 3 years before the summer everyone remembers. So before we get to the myth-busting proper, let me take you right back to the bench where this thing was born, because the real story is better than the legend. It usually is. The Spitfire came out of the mind of a man called Reginald Mitchell, R.J. Mitchell, chief designer at a firm called Supermarine down on the south coast of England. Now, Supermarine didn't build fighters. They built seaplanes. Racing seaplanes, the kind that skimmed off the water on floats and screamed round a course at speeds nobody had seen before. Mitchell had spent the 1920s and 30s designing these beautiful, ferociously fast racing machines for a competition called the Schneider Trophy, and winning it. So when he turned his hand to a fighter, he wasn't starting from nothing. He was a man who already knew in his bones how to make a shape go fast through the air. But here's the part of the story that stops me cold every time. While Mitchell was working on the aeroplane that would make him immortal, he was dying. He'd been diagnosed with cancer in the early 30s. He had an operation, it didn't hold, and through the whole crucial development of the Spitfire he knew, more or less, that he was running out of time. He kept working anyway. There's a story, and I'll flag it because the best stories about famous men get polished over the years, so treat the exact words as tradition rather than gospel. That he was a modest man who didn't even much care for the name Spitfire, thought it was a bit silly. He wanted to build a good aeroplane. He built one of the great ones. And then, in the summer of 1937, R.J. Mitchell died. He was 42 years old. Sit with the timing of that. First flight of the prototype, the 5th of March, 1936. Mitchell dead the following year. The Battle of Britain, the flypasts, the fame, the legend, all of it, every scrap came after he was gone. He never saw a Spitfire fire a shot in anger. He never heard a nation thank him. He designed a masterpiece as a dying man, and then he handed it to the future and left. If you want to know why I get a bit quiet around this aeroplane, that's why. There's a ghost in the design. Now let's talk about the shape, because the shape is the first thing anyone notices, and it's also where the genius and the headache both live. That wing. That long, curved, elliptical wing. Mitchell didn't shape it that way to be pretty, though pretty it certainly is. He shaped it that way for two reasons that pulled against each other. He wanted the wing thin. A thin wing slips through the air with less drag, and less drag means more speed, and speed was the whole game. But a thin wing is a weak wing, and it hasn't got room inside it for all the things a fighter's wing has to carry: the guns, the ammunition, the retracting undercarriage. The ellipse was the answer to that puzzle. An elliptical wing lets you have the low drag you're after while still giving you depth where you need it near the body of the aircraft, tapering away smart and clean toward the tip. On top of that, it had lovely, forgiving behavior when you pushed it hard. It tended to give the pilot a bit of warning before it stopped flying, rather than just letting go. And I have to be fair here and share the credit, because Mitchell gets the statue, but he didn't do it on his own. The aerodynamic thinking behind that wing owed a great deal to a Canadian aerodynamicist on the team, a fellow called Beverly Shenstone, who understood the deep science of the shape. That's the thing about these famous machines. Behind the one name on the plaque, there's always a room full of people, engineers, bless 'em, doing the sums nobody remembers. But here's the sting in the tail, and as a man who's had to actually make things, I feel this one in my teeth. That beautiful elliptical wing was an absolute swine to build. A simple, straight, tapered wing, you can knock those out. Every rib the same family of shape, easy to jig, easy to skin. The ellipse. Every rib along that wing is a different curve. The metal skin has to be formed to a compound, changing shape. It took more time, more skilled hands, more special tooling than a planer wing ever would. When Britain desperately needed Spitfires by the thousand, that gorgeous wing was fighting them every step of the way on the factory floor. Beauty, it turns out, has a bill, and it's the poor souls in the workshop who pay it. And it wasn't just the wing that made this a difficult machine to build. The whole way the Spitfire was put together was, for its day, properly advanced. Go back not many years before, and a lot of aircraft were still built like boxkites grown up. A frame of struts and wires and wooden formers, with fabric stretched over the top like a drum. The fabric didn't hold the airplane together, it just kept the weather out. The frame did the work. The Spitfire was a different animal. It used what we call stressed skin monocoque construction. That word, monocoque, just means single shell, the idea that the smooth metal skin on the outside isn't just a cover, it's a structural part, carrying the loads along with the framework underneath. Think of an egg or the shell of a crab. The outside is the strength. It makes for a lighter, stronger, cleaner, faster aeroplane. It is also, and I speak from bitter experience with old aluminium, a devil to build right and a devil to repair. Every panel matters. Damage the skin and you haven't just made a dent, you've weakened the structure. The men and very much the women in those factories, working that alloy, forming it, riveting it, thousands of rivets to tolerances that mattered, were doing genuinely skilled, genuinely demanding work. When you look at a Spitfire, you're not looking at a thing that fell out of a machine. You're looking at handwork. But I've made you wait long enough because we've been talking about the airframe, the body, and you're on a channel run by an engine man, so you know where my heart really is. Let's open her up and talk about what's up front. Let's talk about the Merlin, the Rolls-Royce Merlin. If the Spitfire is the body, the Merlin is the soul. And honestly, it's the part of this whole story I'd most like to have had on my own bench. It's a V12 at 12 cylinders in 2 banks of 6, in a V, and it is, to my eye, one of the truly great engines of the 20th century. In the early marks, it was putting out somewhere north of 1,000 horsepower. By the later years of the war, through relentless development, squeezing and refining and improving, they had that same basic engine giving 1,500 horsepower and more. That is an astonishing amount of life to pull out of one design, and it's a huge part of why the Spitfire stayed competitive year after year, while other aeroplanes got left behind. And here's what I love about the Merlin as a piece of engineering. It wasn't some fragile, exotic prima donna. It was a hard-working, developable, serviceable engine. The sort of thing a good fitter could understand, maintain, and coax the best out of. It roared. Anybody who stood near a running Merlin will tell you. You don't just hear it, you feel it in your chest. A deep, hard growl that settles into a scream when it opens up. My granddad, and I'll come back to him, he's the reason I do any of this. My granddad worked around these engines in the war, and he said you could tell a healthy Merlin from a sick one across an airfield, blindfolded, just by the note. That's a machine with a voice. That's a machine worth loving. And I'll let you in on something about that engine that the spec sheets never capture. An engine like the Merlin is only as good as the people who look after it, and that engine asked a lot of the men who kept it alive. 12 cylinders, all that heat, all that vibration, running hard at the edge of what the metal of the day could take. It needed watching, adjusting, nursing. The ground crews out on the airfields, the fitters and the riggers, would be at it in the dark and the wet, warming her through, listening to her, checking for the first hint of a temperature creeping up or an oil pressure dropping off. A Merlin that flew home in one piece did so because somebody on the ground had done their job right the night before. That's the part of the story that goes to the heart of what this channel is about. The machine gets the glory, but the machine only ever flies because of the unglamorous people with the spanners. Hold that thought, because it's coming back. Later on, when they wanted even more power still, some marks of Spitfire moved to an even bigger engine. The Rolls-Royce Griffin, bigger capacity, more grunt, a different beast again. But the Merlin is the one the legend rides on, and rightly so. Keep it in your mind, that engine, because in a minute it's going to develop a very embarrassing little problem, and the fix is my favorite part of this entire story. But first, the big one. The myth bust I've been promising you. Because now we come to that famous summer, 1940, and I need to introduce you to the other aeroplane. The one that doesn't get the poems. When people picture the Battle of Britain, they picture Spitfires. Every film, every painting, every memory, Spitfires, wheeling in the blue. And here's the fact that stops people in their tracks. For most of that battle, the Spitfire was outnumbered in Britain's own defense by another fighter entirely. The Hawker Hurricane. The Hurricane is the plane that actually did the bulk of the work, and almost nobody outside the enthusiasts could tell you a thing about it. There were more Hurricanes than Spitfires in that battle, and when you tot up the enemy aircraft brought down, the Hurricanes accounted for more of them than the Spitfires did. Read that again if you need to, because it goes against everything the legend told you. The famous plane was not the workhorse. The workhorse was the one you've never heard of. Now, accuracy always, I keep my promises, let me tell you why, because it's not that the Spitfire was overrated rubbish. It absolutely wasn't. It comes down to a sensible division of labor up in that sky. Broadly speaking, and battle is messy. So take this as the general pattern rather than an iron rule that held every second of every day. The Spitfires, being that bit faster and higher performing, were often sent up to tangle with the German fighters. The fast, dangerous Messerschmitt 109s escorting the raid, and the Hurricanes, tough and steady and available in numbers, were sent after the bombers, the actual thing you had to stop, the aircraft carrying the bombs. So the Spitfire fought the glamorous duel high up, and the Hurricane did the grim, vital, unglamorous job of wading into the bomber streams and breaking them up. Both jobs mattered. You needed both, and there's a hard truth in it too. Going after the bombers meant flying straight into the guns of a whole formation, which was brutal, dangerous work, not the clean single duel of the films. The Hurricane crews earned every bit of that footnote and then some, but look at how memory sorted them out afterward. The plane with the beautiful name and the beautiful wing got the immortality. The honest, sturdy, workmanlike one that shot down more of the enemy got a polite nod in the footnotes. And that, right there, is the thing I can't let go of, and we'll come back to it before we're done, because I reckon it says something about us, not just about aeroplanes. Why was the Hurricane the workhorse? Partly because it was easier to build and easier to mend. It was an older kind of construction in places. A tubular frame with fabric over much of it, which sounds like a step backwards, and in outright performance it was. But it meant that when a Hurricane came home shot about, the ground crews could patch it up fast and get it back in the air, sometimes in hours, and a fabric-covered area could take a hit and carry on where a stressed skin panel might need proper work. The unglamorous machine was, in a hard, practical sense, the more available one. And in a battle of attrition, available beats beautiful. Stan would say that's the whole of engineering in 4 words, and for once I wouldn't argue with him. Right. Now let me take you back to that magnificent Merlin, because I promised you an embarrassing little problem, and this is where a channel about engines really earns its keep. Remember I said the Merlin was one of the great engines. It was. But the early ones had a flaw, a real one, and it wasn't in some exotic part, it was in the carburettor. Now, for anyone who hasn't had their hands in one, the carburettor is the bit that mixes the fuel with the air before it goes into the engine, so it burns right. Simple job, ancient job, I've cleaned out 1,000 of them, and the early Merlin used a float-type carburettor. The fuel sits in a little chamber, its level held by a float, like the cistern in your toilet, and it's fed to the engine from there. Works a treat, as long as gravity's pointing the way it's supposed to. But think about what a fighter pilot does in a dogfight. He throws the aeroplane about, And one of the quickest ways to escape trouble or to dive after an enemy is to shove the nose hard down to bunt. The moment you do that, you get negative G. Everything in the aeroplane that isn't bolted down tries to float upward, including the fuel in that carburettor. For a critical second or two, the fuel sloshes the wrong way. The engine gets either starved of fuel or flooded with too much, and it coughs, splutters, loses power right when you need it most. And the Germans knew it. The Messerschmitt 109 had a fuel-injected engine. No float, fuel squirted straight in under pressure, didn't care which way was up. So a German pilot with a Spitfire on his tail had a simple, infuriating escape. Shove the nose down and dive. His engine kept pulling clean, and the Spitfire that tried to follow to stay with him, its lovely Merlin would stumble and gasp at exactly the wrong moment. The enemy could use the Spitfire's own heart against it. For a fighter pilot, that is a genuinely dangerous, genuinely maddening flaw. Now, you'd imagine the fix for a problem like that would be some enormous, expensive redesign. A whole new engine, years of work. And eventually, yes, better fuel systems came along. But the fix that got the squadrons through, the clever, cheap, brilliant stopgap, is the bit I love more than anything else in this whole aeroplane story. It came from an engineer at the Royal Aircraft Establishment, the government's research outfit, and her name was Beatrice Shilling. Tilly Shilling, they called her. And before you picture some buttoned-up boffin, know this. She was a proper enthusiast, a motorcycle racer, one of a handful of women in that era to lap the Brooklyn circuit at serious speed on a bike she'd tuned herself. She was, in other words, exactly my kind of person. A hands-on engineer who understood machines because she loved going fast on them. And she looked at this negative G fuel problem and she did not reach for a giant solution. She reached for a small one. She worked out that if you fitted a simple restrictor into the fuel line, a little metal washer, a disc with a precisely sized hole in the middle, you could limit how much fuel could rush through in that critical moment. It didn't cure the problem completely. It didn't need to. It stopped the engine flooding and cutting out under negative G in the situations that were actually getting pilots killed. A pilot could bunt, could follow that diving Messerschmitt, and the Merlin would keep pulling. And here's the thing that makes me grin every time. This life-saving fix was a small metal washer with a hole in it. You could hold it in the palm of your hand. It cost next to nothing. It could be fitted to the engines in the field, on the squadrons, without pulling the whole aeroplane apart. Around 1941, the teams went round fitting them, and one of the deadliest weaknesses of Britain's most famous fighter was quietly solved by a woman and a washer. The lads, being lads, gave it a cheeky nickname. They called it Miss Shilling's orifice. And I'll leave that there, but I'll say this. I've spent my life around men who think engineering is about the biggest hammer and the loudest engine. Tilly Shilling understood the real truth of it. Sometimes the whole battle turns on the smallest, cleverest, most precisely made little part, and on somebody sharp enough to see it. That washer did more for the Spitfire than any poem ever did. And I'd bet money most people who love this aeroplane have never heard her name. Well, now you have. There's one more thing I have to tell you about this machine before we step back and take it all in, and it's the thing that, for an engineer, might be the most impressive of the lot. It's not one dramatic moment. It's the long haul. Most aircraft designs of the Second World War had a shelf life. They'd come out, they'd be good for a year or two, and then the pace of wartime development would leave them behind, outclassed, outrun, obsolete. The aeroplane you started the war with was usually a museum piece by the end of it. Not this one. The Spitfire was in the air, in one form or another, from before the war right through to the end of it and beyond. They kept developing it mark after mark after mark, more than 20 distinct marks over its life. Each one improved. More powerful engines, different wings, different armament, higher flying versions, faster versions, versions that flew off aircraft carriers, versions stripped down to take photographs over enemy territory with no guns at all, just speed and altitude and nerve. All told, something over 20,000 of them were built. The last marks were so far beyond the first that they were almost a different aeroplane wearing the same beautiful silhouette. That is a remarkable thing, and it goes right back to good bones, to Mitchell's clean design, and that developable Merlin. A great original design isn't the one that's perfect on day one. It's the one that's got room in it to grow, that can be stretched and improved and kept relevant, long after the man who drew it has gone. Mitchell built something that outlived him by decades and kept getting better the whole time. There's a kind of immortality in that an engineer can appreciate. You don't build the finished thing. You build the thing that can become the finished thing over and over in hands you'll never meet. And I'll tell you when all of this stopped being facts on a page for me and started being real. It was the day I finally got old Bessie running. Bessie's a tank I spent the better part of 3 years restoring, and for 2.5 of those years she would not start. Would not. I did everything. Stan and I pulled that engine apart so many times we could have done it in our sleep, and every time we buttoned her back up she'd turn over, cough once, and die. And Stan would look at me over the top of his glasses like it was my fault. And then one gray afternoon we found it, a tiny thing, a fault so small you'd walk past it 100 times. And we fixed that one little thing, and she caught, and she ran, and the whole shed shook with it. And I'm not ashamed to say I had a bit of a moment. That's why the Shilling washer gets to me the way it does. Because I know, in my hands, that feeling, the enormous machine defeated by the tiny fault, brought back by the tiny fix. And I know that the glory, when it comes, never goes to the washer or to the fault or to the pair of us swearing in a cold shed. It goes to the machine. The machine gets the applause. The people who actually made it work get to stand at the back and watch. And that's really what I've been circling this whole time, so let me turn it around and point it straight at you and at me. Because look at what we've actually got here. We've got a masterpiece, a genuinely beautiful, genuinely brilliant flying machine. And gathered around it, half in shadow, is everybody who made it matter. A dying man who designed it and never saw it fly in anger. An aerodynamicist whose name almost nobody says. Thousands of workers, a great many of them women, forming that fiddly, beautiful wing by hand. A sturdier, humbler aeroplane that quietly shot down more of the enemy and got the footnote for its trouble. A woman with a washer who fixed what the great engine couldn't fix itself. And the ground crews, the fitters, my people, who kept the whole lot flying through cold and mud and exhaustion, so that in the morning there'd be an aeroplane fit to go up. The Spitfire is famous. Every single one of them is more or less forgotten. And I don't think that's a story about aeroplanes at all. I think it's a story about how we remember things, how we love the beautiful famous name and skip straight past the ones who did the work. We do it with machines. We do it with people. We do it, if I'm honest, in our own lives. So here's the question I'd actually like you to sit with, and it's not about 1940. In your own life, your job, your family, your town, who's the hurricane? Who's the one doing the real work, unglamorous and reliable and mostly unthanked, while somebody prettier gets the credit? And here's the harder half of it. Are you sure it isn't you? And are you sure you've noticed the ones around you who are? I'm not saying don't love the Spitfire. Love it. It deserves it. I do. But love it with your eyes open. A machine of real beauty, dreamed up by a dying man in his last years, built by hands nobody named, saved by a washer, and carried into legend on the backs of 1,000 people who never got a poem. That's not a lesser story than the myth. That's a far, far better one. So that's my question for you, and I do read the comments, so go on and tell me. Who's the hurricane in your world, the workhorse who does the job while someone else gets the glory? Name them. Give them their moment down there in the comments. I genuinely love to read it. And while you're at it, if you know a bit of Spitfire lore I've skipped, or you want to argue with me about the hurricane and someone always does get stuck in, I'll be down there and I read every one of them properly, not just the first line. As for me, I'm off back to the shed. Stan reckons Bessie's got a new rattle, which means Stan has moved something and won't admit it. And my granddad's old photograph is watching me from the wall to make sure I do it properly, the way he taught me. If you've enjoyed leaning on the bench with me, and you've the patience for an old man's opinions, and you fancy another go at a machine everyone thinks they know and almost nobody actually does, then subscribe and come back because I've got a whole hanger of them and opinions about everyone. My name's Reg. Mind the wing, she's sharper than she looks, and spare a thought tonight for the ones who did the work.